The world doesn't need to defeat you, it just needs you to feel ashamed, because shame is the leash. It's the invisible tool that makes grown adults second-guess themselves, edit their truth, postpone their goals, and apologize for wanting more. It makes you trade your freedom for approval and call it being mature. And once you see that mechanism clearly, you realize something that changes the rest of your life. Most people aren't controlled by force. They're controlled by what they're afraid others will think. So, here's the line that matters, and I want you to hear it without flinching. Once you stop caring, you become dangerous, not reckless, not cruel. Dangerous in the clean sense, unshakable, hard to manipulate, and competent enough that you don't need to perform. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest. It's the one who can't be bought with praise, can't be cornered with guilt, can't be moved by mockery, and can walk away without needing the last word. Because the second you need approval, you become predictable. You start shaping your personality like a product. You start choosing words that keep you safe instead of words that keep you honest. You start living like your life is an audition, always scanning the room for signals, always trying to stay liked, always trying to look right. And slowly, without one dramatic moment, you lose your sovereignty, your ability to choose your path without asking permission. This episode is about getting that sovereignty back, not by becoming numb, by becoming self-owned, by removing the shame lever that people pull, sometimes intentionally, sometimes casually, and learning how to stand on your own internal ground. We're going to break the illusion that everyone is watching you, kill the nice mask that keeps you harmless, build the emotional armor that makes insults bounce, and reclaim the focus you've been leaking into other people's opinions. Because not caring isn't the absence of feeling, it's the end of being controlled. It's the moment your life stops orbiting the room and starts orbiting your standards. And we begin at the root of it all, the oldest chain in the human mind, the herd instinct. The ancient wiring that taught you belonging equals safety and made approval feel like survival. Your nervous system is older than your ambitions. It doesn't care about your dreams. It cares about your safety. And for most of human history, safety meant one thing: the group. If the tribe accepted you, you ate, you slept, you lived. If the tribe rejected you, you were exposed, cold, hungry, vulnerable. So the brain evolved a simple rule: don't get kicked out, and it enforced that rule with powerful emotions: shame, anxiety, self-doubt, the urge to blend in, the urge to apologize, the urge to smooth everything over. That's the herd instinct, and it's still running in you. Today it shows up in tiny ways that look harmless but quietly shape your entire life. You hesitate before you speak your real opinion. You soften the truth because you don't want tension. You delay the project because you don't want people watching you fail. You act easygoing even when you're not okay because being honest might make someone uncomfortable. You say yes when you mean no because you'd rather be liked than be firm. None of that feels like a survival instinct, but it is. It's the modern version of don't get rejected. And the problem is, this instinct doesn't just protect you from rejection. It protects you from becoming uncommon. Because to become uncommon, you have to risk being misunderstood. You have to risk being judged. You have to risk being labeled. You have to step outside the emotional safety of the herd and do something that makes you visible. And the herd instinct hates visibility unless it's safe visibility. Visibility that earns applause without conflict. The moment your growth threatens someone's comfort, your nervous system starts sending warnings. Slow down, soften, don't push, don't make it weird. So if you want sovereignty, you have to recognize what's happening in real time. You have to catch the moment your choices start orbiting the room, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And once you catch it, you do something simple and serious. You refuse to treat the fear as a command. You don't need to kill the instinct, you need to outgrow it. You teach your body a new lesson through action. Disapproval is not danger. Being misunderstood is not death. Rejection is not the end of your life. It's just noise. And here's the part that changes everything. The more you prove that to yourself, the less the world can control you. Because the world's favorite lever is your need to belong. If you can't handle being disliked, you can be managed. If you can't handle being misunderstood, you can be steered. If you can't handle looking foolish for a moment, you'll never attempt anything big. So step one is this: stop obeying the herd instinct when it tries to edit your life. And once you do that, you're ready for the next illusion, the one that multiplies the fear and keeps people small even when they're alone. The spotlight effect, the belief that everyone is watching you, judging you, tracking your mistakes like your life is entertainment. Let's break that next. Most of the pressure you feel isn't coming from other people. It's coming from an imaginary audience in your head. You walk into a room and you feel watched. You post something and you feel judged. You make a mistake and your mind turns it into a public event. But the truth is almost insulting once you see it clearly. People are not thinking about you the way you think they are. They're thinking about themselves. They're replaying their own awkward moments, defending their own insecurities, trying to look competent in their own story. There's a psychological term for this: the spotlight effect, but you don't need the term. You've lived it. It's that feeling that your flaws are louder than they actually are, that your misstep is permanent, that everyone noticed the tiny thing you noticed. And because you believe you're under a spotlight, you start living like a performer. You edit, you hesitate, you over-explain, you avoid trying, you keep your ambition reasonable. You aim for approval instead of mastery. And this illusion is one of the cleanest forms of control, because once you think you're being watched, you don't need a cage. You cage yourself. Here's the reality that sets you free. In most people's minds, you're a passing scene. Not because you don't matter, but because they're busy surviving their own inner world. Even the harshest critic usually isn't tracking you with devotion. They're projecting their own discomfort onto you for a moment, then moving on. And when you finally accept that, something relaxes in your body. You realize you've been paying rent to a fake audience. This is where not caring begins to feel less like an attitude and more like a correction. You're not becoming arrogant, you're becoming accurate. So instead of asking, "What will they think?" you start asking, "What do I think?" Instead of trying to look impressive, you try to get better. Instead of living to be approved, you live to be solid. Epictetus had a simple way of pointing to this. You don't control what people think, but you do control what kind of person you are. And that shift is dangerous in the best way, because it pulls your identity out of the crowd and places it back in your own hands. And once you stop treating life like an audition, your energy comes back fast. The energy you used to spend on image management turns into focus. The energy you used to spend on avoiding embarrassment turns into action. The energy you used to spend on pleasing turns into progress. You begin moving with a cleaner pace because you're no longer stopping every 5 seconds to check if you're allowed to be yourself. Here's the practical punch. The moment you accept that you're not the main character in other people's minds, you stop performing for them. You start building for you. You start taking risks that your old self would have called too exposed. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to look competent, and you choose a better strategy, becoming competent. And that's where the danger starts to form, quietly, because a person who isn't being watched in their own head can do things most people never do. They can try and fail without collapsing. They can speak plainly without begging for agreement. They can keep going without applause. They can be misunderstood and still stay steady. Now, this clears the stage for the next step, and it's the one that separates "I'm free in my head" from "I'm free in my life." Because once the spotlight illusion dies, you start seeing the next trap with brutal clarity. That nice mask you've been wearing isn't kindness, it's fear dressed up as virtue. And if you keep it on, you can be liked forever and still never be respected. The nice mask is one of the most socially rewarded forms of weakness. And I know that sounds harsh, but listen carefully. I'm not talking about kindness. Kindness is strength. It's a choice. It's grounded. It doesn't beg. It doesn't collapse under pressure. The nice mask is different. The nice mask is what you put on when you're afraid of tension, afraid of being disliked, afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of losing access. So you become agreeable, not because you're peaceful, but because you're scared. That's why it's so dangerous. Because being nice becomes a strategy for staying safe in the herd. You keep things smooth. You laugh things off. You let disrespect slide. You say it's fine when it's not. You avoid confrontation even when your boundaries are being stepped on. And the world loves you for it, at first, because you're convenient. You're easy. You don't challenge anyone. You don't force truth into the room. But here's the rule. People learn the hard way. Convenience is not respect. If you train people that you will tolerate anything to keep the peace, they will keep testing how much you'll tolerate. Not always consciously. It's just how humans work. We lean on the thing that bends. And the more you bend, the more they lean. And one day you wake up and realize you've built a personality around being understandable, forgiving, low maintenance, and now you're exhausted. And somehow nobody values you the way you thought they would. That's the trap. Nice is often a covert contract. You're being pleasant, hoping the world will repay you with appreciation and loyalty. But the world doesn't repay nice. The world often exploits it. So sovereignty requires something that feels uncomfortable at first. You must become willing to disappoint people. Not because you want conflict, but because you want truth. Because truth creates boundaries. Truth creates respect. Truth creates clarity. And clarity is the foundation of peace. Real peace. Not the fake peace that comes from swallowing everything. There's a Stoic edge to this. Marcus Aurelius had a way of reminding himself that his job wasn't to be liked. It was to be good, to do the right thing, to act with integrity. And integrity isn't always popular. Sometimes integrity means you say no. Sometimes it means you hold the line. Sometimes it means you don't smile when you're being disrespected. Sometimes it means you don't explain yourself to people who aren't entitled to your inner world. Here's how you know you're wearing the nice mask. You feel resentment building in your chest, because resentment is the interest you pay on boundaries you didn't enforce. So the move here is simple, but it takes courage. Stop trying to be harmless. A harmless person is not automatically a good person. A harmless person is often just a person who never learned how to hold power. And when you don't hold power, you don't hold respect. You become easy to dismiss, easy to manipulate, easy to guilt. Dangerous, sovereign, means you can be kind without being controllable. You can be calm without being passive. You can be respectful without being weak. You can say no without shaking. You can create conflict when conflict is required and still sleep at night because you didn't betray yourself. And this is where not caring becomes a weapon. Because when you stop caring about being seen as nice, you start caring about being real. You stop trying to keep everyone comfortable and you start keeping your standards intact. Now we go to the next step, because once the nice mask falls off, you meet the next fear. Disapproval. The moment people don't like your boundaries, don't like your truth, don't like your growth. And if you can train yourself to handle disapproval without retreating, you become very hard to control. Good. Because disapproval is the gate, and most people turn around right there. The moment you stop performing, the moment you hold a boundary, the moment you say something honest without wrapping it in apology, you'll feel it. Someone's energy shifts, someone gets colder, someone makes a joke, someone labels you, someone acts like you're different now. And if you're still addicted to approval, that moment feels like danger. Your body wants to backpedal, to soften, to explain, to regain warmth, to repair the room. And that right there is how people keep you small without ever touching you. They punish your growth with disapproval, and you learn to shrink as a reflex. So sovereignty requires disapproval training, not the childish kind where you become rude and call it confidence. Real training. Calm training. The kind where you can feel someone not liking you, and you don't panic. You don't perform. You don't negotiate your standards. You let the discomfort exist without letting it own you, because once you can do that, you become extremely difficult to manipulate. Here's the brutal truth. Not everyone who disapproves of you is a critic. Some are just threatened. Your boundaries remove their access. Your focus exposes their distraction. Your discipline makes their excuses look childish. Your honesty ruins the game they were playing. And instead of rising to your level, they try to pull you back down to theirs through sarcasm, guilt, concern, or the oldest weapon in the herd, making you feel socially unsafe. And the way you win is simple. You stop treating disapproval as evidence that you did something wrong. You treat it as data. You ask one clean question. Is this disapproval coming from wisdom or from comfort? Is it coming from someone who lives with integrity and actually wants your growth? Or from someone who just preferred the old version of you because the old version was easier to control? That question alone will save you years, because when you don't have that filter, you start living like a thermometer. The room changes and you change. Someone frowns and you collapse. Someone disapproves and you become a different person. That's not a life. That's a performance. The Stoics were very direct about this. Epictetus basically says that if you're chasing approval, you're handing your peace to strangers, not because strangers are evil, but because they're unstable. Their moods change, their opinions shift, their values are inconsistent. So if your self-respect is dependent on their reaction, your self-respect is going to be unstable too. That's why not caring is power, not because you don't care about people, but because you refuse to place your identity in their hands. Now, let's make it practical, because this is where most people get inspirational and then do nothing. The next time you feel disapproval, someone doesn't like your boundary, someone doesn't like your honesty, someone doesn't like that you're not available, don't rush to fix it. Don't send the extra message. Don't add the extra explanation. Don't perform warmth to buy peace. Just pause and hold your posture internally. Let the silence be there. Let the awkwardness be there. Let them have their reaction without you chasing the antidote. That is training. And you'll notice something almost immediately. The panic fades faster than you thought it would, because a lot of fear is just untested imagination. You assume disapproval will destroy you. It doesn't. It just feels sharp for a moment. Then it passes. And every time you survive that moment without betraying yourself, your nervous system learns a new rule. I can be disliked and still be safe. That's when you start becoming dangerous, because now you're no longer governable through social pressure. People can't steer you with facial expressions. They can't steer you with sarcasm. They can't steer you with, "I'm disappointed." They can't steer you with withdrawal. You start moving from a deeper place, a place that doesn't need constant permission. And here's the paradox. When you stop begging the room to like you, the right people respect you more. Not because you're harsh, but because you're solid. They can feel you're not acting. They can feel you're not easily bought. They can feel you're not desperate. And that calm firmness is rare. But we need to go one level deeper. because disapproval is the outside pressure, and the next step is what happens when the pressure becomes personal, when it comes as an insult, a jab, a comment meant to get under your skin. This is where most people lose their center, because words feel like weapons when you still grant them authority. So now we build emotional armor, the kind that makes insults bounce, the kind that keeps your dignity intact without needing to win every exchange. An insult is only powerful if it lands on something unstable inside you. That's not motivational talk, it's a mechanical truth. Words don't break bones, they don't steal your future, they don't change your worth. They only become dangerous when you give them permission to define you. When you treat the speaker like a judge, when you treat their opinion like a verdict, when you let your identity become a fragile thing that other people can poke. That's why the sovereign mind becomes emotionally slippery, emotional Teflon, not numb, not cold, just hard to hook. Because most insults aren't information, they're attempts at control. Someone feels small, so they try to make you smaller. Someone feels threatened, so they try to stain your confidence. Someone can't compete with your discipline, so they attack your character. Someone can't argue with your results, so they go after your personality. And the hidden goal is always the same: to get a reaction, to pull you into their emotional world, to make you prove yourself, to make you lose composure. So the question becomes, do you want to be controlled by other people's mouths? This is where Stoicism becomes brutally practical. Epictetus had that clean idea that people aren't disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them. In other words, the insult itself is neutral noise until you interpret it as truth. The pain isn't inside the word. The pain is in your agreement with the word. And once you see that, you start playing a different game. You stop asking, how do I respond? And you start asking, why do I need to respond? Because the need to respond is usually ego trying to protect an image. It's the old audition mindset again: I must correct this, or I look weak. But sovereignty is when you don't need to correct every misunderstanding. You don't need to win every exchange. You don't need to defend your identity to people who don't even understand themselves. That's what makes you dangerous. You become harder to bait, harder to provoke, harder to drag into stupid wars. Now, this doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you choose your battlefield. There's a difference between a boundary and a reaction. A boundary is clean, it's calm, it's enforced. A reaction is emotional, it's messy, it's performative. When you're emotionally immune, you can still enforce boundaries, but you don't do it from anger, you do it from clarity. So, when someone throws an insult, you learn to do something most people never do. You delay your ego. You pause long enough to see what's actually happening. Is this person trying to extract a reaction? Are they projecting? Are they testing whether you're controllable? Are they speaking from pain? Are they speaking from envy? Or are they actually giving you feedback worth hearing? Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is not take it personally. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is treat the insult like background noise and keep your dignity intact. That takes real power because it denies them the reward. And here's the part that hits. The more you become competent, disciplined, and internally validated, the fewer insults can touch you because you start having evidence. You have proof of who you are. You know what you do when nobody's watching. You know what you've built. You know what you can handle. So a random comment doesn't become identity. It becomes weather. If you want a clean mental move for this, it's simple. Separate the speaker from the statement. Most insults are not about you, they're about the person's inner state. And when you recognize that, you stop drinking poison as if it's truth. Now we take the next step, because once insults stop working, something else begins to happen. You start speaking differently. You stop shaping your words to be liked. You stop watering down your truth to avoid tension. You stop hiding behind politeness. You start using authenticity like a weapon, not to hurt people, but to cut through games. That's where you become magnetic. and dangerous to anyone who lives by manipulation. When you stop caring, your words get cleaner. Not louder, cleaner, less decoration, less apology, less selling, less explaining. You stop wrapping truth in soft packaging so everyone can swallow it comfortably. You say what you mean what you say. And that alone makes you dangerous because most of the world runs on performance and indirectness. People hiding their motives, hiding their resentment, hiding their fear behind just joking, hiding their jealousy behind concern. Weaponized authenticity is not arrogance. It's alignment with reality. It's when you refuse to participate in games that require you to lie about what you see. And notice what happens the moment you do that. The room changes. People who survive on manipulation start feeling exposed because manipulation needs fog. It needs confusion. It needs you to doubt yourself. It needs you to be polite enough to ignore obvious things. It needs you to keep pretending. Authenticity burns fog. It makes things visible. It forces clarity into the space. That's why truth feels sharp. Not because you're trying to cut people, because it cuts through illusion. Most people avoid this because authenticity has a cost. You will be misunderstood. You will be labeled. Some people will call you intense, cold, arrogant, dramatic, too honest. And if you're still addicted to approval, that price feels unbearable. So you keep your real thoughts locked behind a social mask, and you call it being diplomatic. But inside, you feel smaller, because every time you hide your truth, you teach yourself you can't handle being real. Sovereignty is the opposite. Sovereignty is when you can be real without panicking. That doesn't mean you say everything that comes to mind. It means you refuse to betray your perception. You refuse to fake agreement. You refuse to pretend disrespect is normal. You refuse to act like you didn't notice the obvious. You become someone whose presence has weight because people sense you're not there to be accepted. You're there to be accurate. And accuracy is rare. There's a Stoic simplicity here. You control your character. You control your choices. You control your integrity. Everything else is noise. So weaponized authenticity becomes the habit of putting character above comfort. You choose to be truthful even when it would be easier to be liked. You choose to be direct even when it would be safer to be vague. And here's the strange benefit. The right people start trusting you more because they can feel you're not acting. They can feel you're not fishing. They can feel you're not trying to get something. Your yes means yes. Your no means no. Your silence means something. In a world of over-explanation and fake positivity, that kind of clean signal is magnetic. But let's be clear, authenticity becomes dangerous only when it's paired with self-control. Without self-control, honesty becomes emotional dumping. It becomes cruelty. It becomes a lack of discipline. Sovereignty is different. Sovereignty is when you speak from center, not from heat. You don't use truth to wound. You use truth to end confusion. And when you live like this, you stop fearing one of the biggest prisons in modern life, embarrassment. Because the fear of looking stupid is what keeps people lying, performing, and staying safe. If you can't handle a little embarrassment, you'll never do anything bold. So the next step is the freedom to fail. The moment you stop caring about looking foolish and you start taking risks that change your life. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they're embarrassed. Embarrassment is the invisible wall. It's the fear of looking stupid, looking new, looking clumsy, looking like you don't belong. And that fear is so powerful that it makes people choose a smaller life just to keep their image intact. They'd rather be quietly miserable and respectable than be a beginner in public for a few months. That's why not caring becomes dangerous, because the moment embarrassment loses its power over you, your life expands fast. You start doing things other people only fantasize about, not because you're braver by nature, but because you stopped treating comfort as a compass. You start learning skills out loud. You start taking action before you feel ready. You start building before you feel confident. You stop needing perfection to begin, and that is how massive wins are created, through repetition, while you still look unpolished. Here's the truth. Every competent person you admire was once awkward. Every master was once clumsy. Every disciplined person was once inconsistent. But most people never see that stage because they hide from it. They want the reward without the humiliation of the early phase. They want to look like a pro while they're still a beginner. And that fantasy keeps them stuck. So sovereignty demands a decision. Are you protecting your image, or are you building your ability? Because you can't do both. If your image is your priority, you'll avoid risk. You'll avoid failure. You'll avoid being seen trying. You'll keep your dreams private, so you never have to face the possibility of not being amazing immediately. And that's how people die with potential intact, untouched, untested, unused. But if ability is your priority, you start using failure like training. You stop calling it humiliation and start calling it feedback. You stop treating mistakes like identity and start treating them like information. And that's when you become dangerous, because you're not fragile anymore. You're adaptable. You're resilient. You don't need to be protected from looking foolish. You can afford to look foolish for a season because you know what you're building. This is why the people who become great often have something in common. They were willing to be bad at something in public. They were willing to be judged. They were willing to be seen learning. They stopped trying to impress and started trying to improve. And when you do that, you unlock a deeper kind of confidence, the kind that isn't based on praise. It's based on proof. You trust yourself because you've watched yourself stand up after mistakes. You've watched yourself take hits and keep moving. You've watched yourself do the work even when it wasn't pretty. Now, there's a second reward hiding inside this freedom. Energy returns. Because caring about looking perfect is exhausting. Caring about being impressive is exhausting. Caring about being accepted is exhausting. And once you stop spending energy on how do I look, you suddenly have fuel for a better question. What am I building? That's the next step. Energy conservation. Laser focus. The moment you stop leaking power into opinions and start pouring it into results. Caring is expensive, not in a poetic way, in a literal daily energy way. Every time you worry about what they think, you burn fuel. Every time you rehearse a conversation in your head, you burn fuel. Every time you over-explain to protect your image, you burn fuel. Every time you check for validation, refresh for reactions, adjust your personality to keep the room comfortable, you burn fuel. And most people are so used to paying that tax that they think exhaustion is normal. It's not normal, it's leakage. And once you stop caring, your power comes back fast. Not because life gets easier, but because your attention stops bleeding out in 10 directions. You stop living like your mind is public property. You stop letting strangers rent space in your head. You stop donating your best focus to people who don't even build anything with their own life. This is what laser focus actually means. You become selective with what deserves your emotional energy. Because here's the truth nobody likes to admit. Most of what drains you is not work. It's social maintenance. It's emotional politics. It's trying to be understood by people who don't want to understand you. It's trying to be liked by people whose respect you don't even value. It's trying to win invisible games. So the sovereign mind does something ruthless and simple. It closes tabs. It stops running in the background of other people's opinions. It stops scanning for approval. It stops trying to predict every reaction. It stops caring about being safe in everyone's eyes. And that creates a rare form of peace, clean mental space. And in that space, your goals finally get enough oxygen to grow. This is why people who stop caring often start winning quickly. Not because they discovered a secret, because they stopped wasting energy. They wake up with more fuel. They make decisions faster. They recover from setbacks faster. They train harder because they're not negotiating with their ego every day. They speak less and do more. They stop needing to announce progress. They just stack it, and the shift is visible. Even if you don't say a word, people can feel when you're no longer available for distraction because your presence changes. You become calmer, more direct, less eager to please, less reactive, and that's the kind of energy that makes you dangerous. Not dramatic danger, but the danger of someone who is actually moving forward while everyone else is busy talking. Now, this focus has a side effect that's almost unfair in relationships and negotiation. Detachment becomes leverage, because the person who cares less is harder to control, and that's our next step. The mystery of indifference, the power to walk away, and why detachment creates real authority. Detachment is leverage. And people don't like hearing that because they confuse detachment with cruelty. But detachment isn't cruelty. It's independence. It's the ability to stay calm when someone tries to pull you with emotion, to stay steady when someone offers you bait, to stay clear when someone uses guilt as a rope. In negotiation, in relationships, in business, in everyday life, the person who can walk away has the power. Always. Because desperation makes you compromise. Desperation makes you tolerate what you shouldn't tolerate. Desperation makes you accept a bad deal just to avoid the discomfort of no. But detachment makes you patient. It makes you selective. It makes you unbribable. This is why not caring becomes dangerous. When you stop caring about being chosen, you stop getting controlled by the fear of being unchosen. So think about how people manipulate. Most manipulation isn't aggressive. It's subtle. It's emotional. It's someone changing their tone to make you chase. Someone withdrawing affection to make you perform. Someone giving you small praise to hook you, then using that hook to steer you. Someone acting disappointed so you'll over-explain. Someone acting offended so you'll collapse into apology. And it works because you care. Because you need the relationship to feel stable. Because you need the room to feel warm. Because you need to feel approved. Detachment breaks the mechanism. Because when you're detached, you don't panic when the mood changes. You don't rush to fix tension. You don't trade your dignity for temporary peace. You observe. You stay calm. You let people reveal themselves. And that calm is terrifying to manipulators because they can't read you the way they read needy people. They can't predict you. They can't push a button and get a reaction. You don't give them the reward. And here's the deeper truth. Detachment forces honesty in others because when they realize you can leave, they stop playing games or they leave themselves. Either way, the relationship becomes cleaner, less fog, more truth. And truth is always worth it, even when it costs you something. This is also where self-respect becomes visible, not as words, but as behavior. You don't threaten to walk away. You just quietly have the ability. That ability changes how you carry yourself. You stop negotiating your standards like they're optional. You stop staying in conversations that insult you. You stop accepting almost love, almost respect, almost effort. And notice what happens inside you. Your anxiety drops, because anxiety thrives when you feel trapped. When you know you can't leave, everything feels heavier. But when you know you can leave, your nervous system relaxes. You're no longer cornered. You're no longer begging. You're choosing. That's sovereignty. Now, there's one final transformation that comes after detachment, and it's what makes you truly dangerous in a world that runs on predictable people. You become unpredictable, not chaotic, not impulsive, unpredictable because you're not trying to get applause. You're not trying to fit a script. You're not trying to be the person they can manipulate with approval. And when you're not chasing validation, people can't play you like a piece on a board. That's the next step. becoming unpredictable, the end of being a predictable, approval-driven character in someone else's game. When you're addicted to approval, you become easy to predict. People don't need to study you deeply, they just need to understand what you crave. Praise, attention, acceptance, the feeling of being good, and once they understand that, they can steer you without force. They can reward you with warmth, punish you with coldness, and watch you adjust yourself like a trained animal. That's the ugly side of caring too much. You become programmable. But when you stop caring, that program breaks, because you stop moving for applause. You stop making choices that are designed to look right. You start making choices that are right for your mission, your standards, your future. And that makes you unpredictable, not in a reckless way, but in a sovereign way. You're no longer reacting to the social environment like a thermometer. You're acting from an inner code, and an inner code can't be manipulated by the room. This is why people fear the emotionally free person. They can't bait them easily. They can't guilt them easily. They can't shame them into compliance. They can't threaten them with disapproval and expect a collapse. That person might leave. That person might stay silent. That person might tell the truth with a calm face. That person might refuse the deal. That person might walk away from attention. That person might refuse to explain themselves. And because their moves aren't driven by the usual neediness, they become difficult to control. And control is what most social games are about. A lot of relationships, workplaces, friendships, even families have unspoken rules. Rules like don't speak too plainly, don't upset the peace, don't change too fast, don't outgrow the group, don't challenge the hierarchy. If you obey those rules, you get rewards, approval, inclusion, comfort. If you break them, you get punished, gossip, coldness, criticism, labels. That's the herd's immune system. When you stop caring, you step outside the system. And that's where you become dangerous. Not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're no longer domesticated. Now, there's a balance here that matters. Sovereignty is not impulsiveness. Being unpredictable doesn't mean you do random things to look tough. It means you're not emotionally bribable. It means your decisions are not available for purchase. It means you can be consistent without being controllable, because your consistency is anchored to principle, not to approval. This is where your life starts feeling clean. You stop chasing outcomes that are meant to impress. You stop making promises you don't intend to keep. You stop negotiating your identity. You stop living like you need to be understood by everybody. You stop leaking energy into performance. And in that clean space, you become what the title promised: dangerous. Not because you're angry, because you're free. So now we arrive at the final chapter, the sovereign mind. The state where you stop being a mirror reflecting the world's opinions and you become a light source. Where validation becomes internal, where your standards become non-negotiable, where not caring stops being a tactic and becomes your identity. Let's close it. The sovereign mind is quiet. Not quiet because it's afraid to speak, but quiet because it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to convince. It doesn't need to perform. It doesn't need to win every conversation. It doesn't need to be understood by everyone in the room. It moves from a deeper place, an inner agreement that doesn't change when the audience changes. That's what once you stop caring really means. It doesn't mean you stop caring about life. It means you stop handing your steering wheel to people who don't even know where they're going. Because if we're honest, most people spend their whole life as a mirror. They reflect the room, they reflect the mood, they reflect the opinions around them. If the room approves, they feel powerful. If the room disapproves, they collapse. If the room praises, they expand. If the room criticizes, they shrink. And that's not living, that's being managed. Sovereignty is when you become the source. You validate yourself by your behavior. You measure yourself by your discipline. You trust yourself because you keep your word to yourself. You don't need to announce who you are. Your actions keep the receipt. You don't need to defend your identity to strangers. Your life is the defense. You don't need to fear misunderstanding because you stopped needing permission. And the paradox is that this is the moment you become dangerous in the most effective way. Not loud danger, not chaotic danger, the dangerous calm, the kind that can't be provoked easily, the kind that can't be guilted into compromising, the kind that doesn't flinch when someone tries to shame you back into being small. Because shame doesn't work on a person who already accepts themselves. And yes, people will still talk. People will still judge. People will still misunderstand you. That never stops. What stops is you letting it matter. What stops is you letting their opinion become your internal law. What stops is you outsourcing your self-respect. This is where you stop caring in the cleanest sense. You care about your standards more than your image. You care about your mission more than your reputation. You care about being solid more than being liked. You care about truth more than comfort. You care about progress more than applause. So the final instruction is simple, but it's a real line in the sand. Decide what you answer to, because if you answer to the crowd, you will live like a pawn. If you answer to your ego, you'll live like a performer. But if you answer to your standards, quietly, consistently, you become sovereign. And once you're sovereign, you don't just feel confident, you feel free, free to be disliked, free to fail, free to speak plainly, free to walk away, free to build, free to become the kind of person who doesn't need to prove power, because power is already there. That's the paradox of danger. The less you need approval, the more unstoppable you become, and the world can feel that.